to explain things.
Wait, show me that. Is that the, hold on, hold that up. Is that the leather?
Yeah,
okay, so viewers asked me if it comes in leather, and I said, I don't know. I just have the one they sent me.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So this is the leather one. It's actually, I mean, it's beautiful. So it's a little floppy. So it's a little harder to carry, with one hand, because it kind of does the whoop sort of thing. But it's beautiful. They did a really, really good job with this one too.
There you go, viewers. You asked if it was just in hardback. No, I have the hardback, and this is very easy to beat somebody with one hand. So real quick, I want to touch on the actual content of Maccabees that you and your wife did the notes for. For those who are unfamiliar, I'll link the episode where we did talk about the apocryphal books or Deutero-canonical books and why we should read them, and kind of, when David did an overview for us here in the dojo on all the books. But first Maccabees, a lot of people don't even know what a Maccabee, people who are onto the news and they hear Maccabees, they think, isn't that racist Israeli football team that rioted recently? And, that's the association, because Tel Aviv Maccabi, that's their football team.
Right.
But that comes from way, way back. And it comes from Judas Maccabeus and that family. So just like elevator pitch level, who are the Maccabees? And what is First and Second Maccabees telling us about them, or about anything else not involving them?
Yeah. So if you go back to Alexander the Great, so he takes over, was this around 323 BC? He goes and takes over the whole world, and then he dies. And so the whole world is kind of speaking Greek now. And then you have his successors, which end up, going into different empires. One of them is the Seleucid Empire. And so they're one of the empires, so again, a kind of Greek empire, which is technically over, Judea. And sometimes the relationship's good. Sometimes the relationship is not good, but this is the empire that, those in Judea are living under now. You have a particularly bad king. Antiochus Epiphanes. And he, along with some others, decide that they're going to turn the Jerusalem temple into a temple of Zeus. He has a rather high view of himself. Again, Epiphanes means that he is the Epiphany. He's God manifest. Mm-hmm. Usually people that think that they are God manifest don't end up doing really, really great things.
They don't have a good track record.
They don't have a good track record. So the long story short is, 167, I think it is BC, if I have the date correct, or the year correct, ends up taking over the temple in Jerusalem, and it's becomes the temple of Zeus instead. And so it's the worship of the God of Israel is disallowed from there, and instead they're having crazy parties. And anybody who is trying to still practice the religion of Israel ends up being pretty severely persecuted for this. So those, and it's pretty grisly. Those who are circumcised, their kids, the kids are killed, hung from their necks. It's really terrible situation. And if you think in terms of what things are like in the Old Testament, if you're going back to the Judges, for example, the Maccabees are a little bit like the judges that God raises up to set the people free from the oppression that they're under. And that's exactly what happens. And so you have Mattathias and his sons, so Judas Maccabeus, and then, the rest of the Hasmonean family. And they're the ones that end up really against all odds in this kind of really cool David and Goliath way, leading the revolt against this evil empire and being able to restore, the temple of Jerusalem. And so this is where, again, to fast forward a little bit, this is where, Hanukkah comes from. And so Hanukkah comes from, Hanak, so to dedicate or to rededicate. And it goes back to when in, I think it's 164 BC, the temple, they get it back. So they're rededicating it. And this then ends up being something that, Jews go to Jerusalem to celebrate this. It seems to have taken on the character of a pilgrimage feast, like the other ones that you see. So Passover, for example. And where you see this illustrated, interestingly, is actually in the Gospel of John, because if you read in John 10, you have Jesus, and he's there for the feast of dedication, the feast of rededication. Like, oh yeah, I remember that feast. Which one is that again? which one is that again? And you realize you don't know about it if you don't have Maccabees in the Bible, because it is the observation, it's the celebration of this particular feast to mark this very, very unlikely deliverance that God worked through this family to rescue the temple and to restore the worship of the one true God in it. And so you can see, and I think that De Silva's work, actually, for me, he's one of the best when it comes to this stuff. He's really good at pointing out how it was. These are the kinds of things that Jesus himself was celebrating. It wasn't just part of his thought world. He was actually going down to Jerusalem to participate in the celebration of this, which I think is helpful for us to see, as followers of Jesus, how this can still all have an enduring significance for us as well.
And the theological, I think, nugget that I always love about that story is Hanukkah, the festival of lights. That's where Jesus, what did he proclaim? That he's the light of the world.
The light of the world.
And what better holiday would there be if you were going to make that message clear? Yeah. And it's, if you don't know anything about First Maccabees and that history, it just flies right over your head.
Yeah, right over your head. Absolutely. So it really helps. Again, it's one of the things that I love about this material.
Well, let me ask you, there's some points you made since you're talking about this. You made 4 points at the end of the essay, or at the end of the introduction to the book of Maccabees, of like, what's the payoff? Like, that's because a lot of, especially Protestant Christians, like, we want to know, okay, tradition, festivals, high church, liturgy, blah, blah, blah. Like, they don't have tolerance for that. They want to know, what is the biblical exegetical payoff? And at the end of the essay, you give 4 things that you think are important about Maccabees and what it tells us about the world of the New Testament. So let me buzz through each of these 4 and let you say a little something about each one. Totally. The first one you say is Maccabees helps us understand, why are Jewish messianic hopes in Christ's time so focused on military and political leadership? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So if one is thinking in terms of the most recent deliverance that one has experienced, this is the most recent deliverance, the experience. And it was this, a military act that takes place. You also see how it is that the high priesthood itself morphs. And I think that this might be one of the later points is there. The high priesthood itself. So Judas, and then you have Jonathan and Simon. You see how under these kind of successive figures, how the high priesthood ends up becoming not just a religious office, but a political and a military office as well, which I think is obviously then going to inform the kinds of views that you have as far as, hey, if you're looking for a great leader, what kind of silhouette they're gonna be filling. So I think that's really important. I mean, you can go to the next point. I don't want to
I think it's a key concept, because when you in the Old Testament, you don't see the priesthood really having that role that they have in the New Testament. And so if you don't know about the intertestamental period, then where did that come from? So that's one reason. You also, it helps us answer, why do ideas like not maintaining separation from Gentiles or God's favor being shown to foreigners, when Jesus gets in trouble a couple of times because of that, why do they provoke such violent negative reaction from the Jewish audiences at that time? How does Maccabees inform that question?
Yeah. So if you just read in First Maccabees 1, it's really interesting. The whole, it's one of the cool things about the text. It says this doesn't come, ultimately, Antiochus, though he is indeed a jerk. This isn't just Antiochus' fault. This comes from our own sort of national apostasy. And so you have Jews that say, you know what would be great? It would be great if we could just go become Greeks instead. And so they say, ever since we separated from the Gentiles, all these bad things happen. What let's do, let's go make a covenant with the Gentiles. Let's go and be like them. Let's establish all the kinds of things. And it's from doing this. This is what opens the door where by the end of the chapter, Judaism is effectively outlawed. On not just outlawed, it's outlawed on pain of death. You're no longer allowed to practice anymore. It gives you, I think, some appreciation for how, like take Paul in Acts when he's at Jerusalem and he's kind of giving his story. And, he kind of gives his whole testimony. Jesus appears to him. Everybody's listening. No major issues there. And he kind of does all this stuff. And then he tells the story of Jesus appearing to him in the temple. And even then, they're still listening. And it's when Jesus says, I'm going to go and send you to the Gentiles. That's when the riot really takes over. That's when they say, we're going to tear this guy's limbs off. And you can see how you're in a sense, you're touching a nerve there. The idea of, hey, we're going off to make a covenant with the Gentiles. Didn't you see what that led to before? And so the way that is so, I guess you could say, so sensitive and such a flashpoint within the pages of the New Testament, really, I think knowing the Maccabean history gives you, I think, an appreciation, for that.
That leads into, you did ask the point about, like you said, how the high Jewish priesthood had morphed into a political entity. And then the last point you make is kind of unpacking what you just said. Why have the Jews whose observance of Torah during the time of the prophets was often tepid, like the prophets were always telling Israel, turn back to Torah, observe Torah, observe Torah. And then by the first century, in the time of Jesus, they are super zealous for observing Torah, to the point where the Pharisee party arises as like Torah enforcers, not officially appointed, but just sort of this movement among the people to take the country back for God. And it manifests itself down to even getting angry when the disciples pluck grain and rub it in their hands, or Jesus heals someone and says, pick up your mat. Like there's this zealousness for the law that you don't even find in most of the Hebrew Bible. Is that Maccabees explains that?
It does. Yeah, it does. Just at a very basic level, I think when you have all of these things taken away from you, you probably appreciate them more. I have this happen with my kids all the time. It's, there's a toy that's there and they don't care about it. They're not playing with it at all. And then one of my other kids goes and takes it away and starts playing with it. And then immediately,
it's Agnes the only thing that they want.
Because Mike wants to go and play with the, the wand or whatever it happens to be. This is literally every day of my life. This is happening. And I think that at a national level, there's probably something like that going on. We're having all of these things, taken away from them. It does inspire this kind of, zeal, that they have. And, one of the things that, I show, maybe I show, I hope I try to show, is that, the zeal itself is not inherently a bad thing. Right. The question is what's your zeal directed towards? And so, when Jesus is flipping the tables over in the temple, it says that he's acting with zeal. Zeal for your house shall consume me. But it's properly directed, and it's directed against the injustice that's taking place there, and what was an abuse of what's supposed to be. This is what the house of God is supposed to be for. You're using it for this instead, and you can see this. St. Paul, for example, he tests his people to have zeal, which seems to be a good thing, but it's not according to knowledge. They don't have all of the details right. They don't have all the facts right. And so they're getting zealous either for the wrong things or in the wrong ways, which is, I think, what he sees himself as doing as well.
You get coming away from reading Maccabees and knowing intertestamental events. What I found in my own life is it makes me more. One is I hate when people use Pharisee as an insult. I know in English it's become an insult because 2,000 years of church history and particularly for elements of the church kind of demonizing Judaism or the Jews and Martin Luther completely reading his own, hang-ups into that entire situation, which that's a whole other episode where we can unpack that because even though I'm a Protestant, not a huge fan of Luther. But you see, I don't like Pharisee being used as an insult because Pharisees were the type of worshipers that if you pastor a church, you would love a congregation of Pharisees, because they are the ones who are helping everyone realize, hey guys, holiness matters. Us collectively following God in covenant matters. You know, they'd be the ones at the school board meetings. They would be the ones at the city council planning. You know, they'd be the ones fighting to get the soup kitchens opened and hospitals and things, because they weren't all just these mindless hypocrites. That's the character. And some of them were, of course, but thousands of Pharisees got saved at Pentecost and became believers. Like the Pharisees they were, you know, it's like the zeal wasn't the problem. Like you said, it was, what was that zeal based on?
Acts. Yeah. I mean, you have Paul in Acts, you know, when he's on trial with the Sanhedrin, and he says, I'm a Pharisee, I'm the son of Pharisees, and this is what I'm on trial for today. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that any of us really want to say he was totally lying there. You know, obviously he's a Christian before anything else, but that identity as a Pharisee, there's still something, you know, within that, which is true enough for him that I think without crossing his fingers, as far as I know, I don't think that his fingers were crossed as he was saying that. He really can't say, this is still the sect of Judaism that I identify with, which I see now is brought to its true fulfillment in what it is that Christ has done. I think it's really important. I think it's something that we often just don't miss or take seriously, not as seriously as we should.
Yeah, there's that spectrum of within Judaism. We had Jason Staples on and his 2 works that he's done on that.
Oh yeah,
and great. His earlier work, the idea of Judaism in Second Temple period, it really brought a lot of this to the forefront, and how, you know, there were like Pharisees. Paul would have been, of course I'm a Pharisee. And of course that means that I believe that Israel is this, not this. And there was groups even among faithful Jews that would be like, yeah, we are Jews, we're Israel, you're not, to other Jews, because of things that they were thought were covenant deal breakers. And so the intertestamental literature, I highly recommend Jason's work for viewers if you haven't read it. Both volumes, they're just excellent, but it's deep, it's dense, scholarly stuff. But there's a landscape.
Easy introduction, by the way.
What's that?
I did if you want an easy introduction, by the way, it's funny because I wrote the article to the Dictionary of Paul and his Letters on Israel, which I think because nobody else wanted to touch it, and so they had me do it. And Jason was actually one of the main people that I was working with as well. And
in the second edition that Scott and EJ did.
Yeah, exactly. So
that's great.
So having do that one, and Jason was an awesome conversation partner with that. He's been really encouraging. So if you want to try to get into some of the things that he's doing in kind of an introduction to the questions that he's asking and wrestling with, and I think coming up with a lot of really good valuable stuff that we've just kind of forgotten. That can, if you happen to have that huge book that's even bigger than the Ignatius Study Bible.
You only contribute to these massive tomes. No, I'm glad you told me that, actually, because I have the original, the first edition I've had for forever. And then I think I got the second, I think when it came out in Logos, I can't remember if I got it in Logos or Accordance. I have it, but I haven't used it yet.
Yeah.
That's really important. I'm going to actually, after we film this, I'm going to go pull that article and read it. It's just the one on Israel.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Exactly. So it's on Paul's understanding of Israel. I think it was originally Mike Bird that was supposed to do it, and I think he was probably too busy or just didn't want to touch it. It's so hard to do, and so they needed somebody dumb enough to say yes to writing that one, and they knew where to look.
That's awesome, especially if it interacts with Jason's work, because Jason's was my book of the year last year, like 2023. It was the most impactful book I read. So if this is in that same milieu, then I'm happily gonna jump into that. Well, let's talk real quick about Second Maccabees, because Second Maccabees is not the sequel to First Maccabees. What is going on, and why can't y'all name your books right, Catholics? Come on.
Yeah, seriously, that's a great question. So it's what you have in Second Maccabees is you have a second perspective on a lot of the same events that you have but which is, I guess you could say, has a different kind of theological flavor to it. It doesn't map precisely onto all of the same history, though the central stories are all kind of the same. An analogy, if you're thinking in terms of, where else in the Old Testament do you see something like this? I think in terms of what you have, like First and Second Kings, and then First and Second Chronicles, where you're going through a lot of the same material. I mean, I guess from Samuel all the way to Kings and then through First and Second Chronicles. Similar material that's discussed, but with different emphases, different things that are drawn out. I think an analogy that comes to mind, for me in describing the differences between them. One of them, First Maccabees has a really straightforward style to it. You could just be reading, Samuel or Kings or Judges or something like that. It fits in, I think, quite well with the terse qualities that you see within Jewish historiography of this earlier period. So it's kind of like having the same theme played within two very different genres. So one of them, if you think like medieval plain chant, for example, that could be like First Maccabees. And then imagine having those same like kind of themes, but like in a very Baroque kind of like ornate style. That's what Second Maccabees would be like. And so the things that are implicit within First Maccabees, Second Maccabees is often making very, explicit. Another good analogy, if you're thinking to the relation between them, is if you read sort of, Hebrew Esther and then Greek Esther, so the longer version. Hebrew Esther, God's actions, it's very, described very implicitly, such that, God is directly mentioned. Greek Esther is much more, explicit in the way that it's talking about, God's action. And that's the flavor that you get more in Second Maccabees as well. And then going along with that, there's a lot more, I guess you could say, explicit theological reflection within Second Maccabees than you have in the first text.
Mm-hmm. You talk about, you don't have to unpack these, but just for viewers who are wondering, in your essay or in your intro, you give ideas of doctrines that are important and that Second Maccabees touches on: resurrection in the Old Testament, creation, ex nihilo, substitutionary atonement, and those are sort of across the board. All Christians would agree with those. But then you talk about the unique doctrines that not all Christians would accept: praying for the dead, concept of purgatory. And that's why, some like Calvin and other reformers are like, no time for this nonsense. And then others, though, which I didn't know, you said that the Anabaptists, like Mennonites and others, continued to accept Second Maccabees as scripture, which that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting if you actually get into some of the weeds. I think that one of the things that we often sort of assume is that the way that we do things right now are the same, the way that it's been done going all the way back to the reformers. And it's interesting because we know that that's not true. Even just if we have like an old King James Bible that's printed like 100 years ago, I guess, and this is round numbers, but a couple of generations ago, all Protestants still had the Apocrypha kind of, in back. And so for most of, Reformation history, most Protestant Bibles have still had those as part of it. And it's only been, within the past couple of generations that's dropped out more. So I think that getting into some of that history and the way that these books, have been received and still valued within these different contexts, it's just really fun. I really enjoy it a lot. So you get that, interesting stuff with the Anglicans, interesting stuff that you have, with the Anabaptists as well. It's fun history.